Black Lives Mattering. And then Patrice put a hashtag in front of it, and I don't know anything about social media. I thought it was a pound sign. You can tell I'm not a millennial. A pound sign. You know what I'm saying? That's actually what it is.
Yeah.
I did not know what a hashtag was. And Patrice and I, as organizers, started to talk because we saw it catching. We said, we should do something. What if we built an organizing project where people could do more than just talk about how mad they are online, but actually do something about it? And maybe we can even use these places where people are talking to each other online and try to bring people together to do stuff offline. Because sharing articles is not going to change what happens in our criminal system. Arguing with people on social media is not going to change the fact that less than 1% of police officers who murder are ever held accountable. So Opal does know a lot about social media, and Opal said, I can help. I know that a hashtag is a hashtag and not a pound sign. We started this organization, not a movement. Movements, I think, are long, and they have stages, ebbs and flows. We all come into eras of movements, but movements that we're coming into now have been there before us. Thank God. We started an organization to do two things. We wanted there to be a response to the impact of state-sanctioned violence on the lives of Black people. And we wanted there to be a call to action that encouraged us to do something about it. We started as a series of hashtags on social media, a series of pages. We grew into an organization with 40 chapters in 4 countries. Black Lives Matter is not just a hashtag, and a hashtag is not a movement. A hashtag is a way to follow a conversation. It's a way to find where to get into a conversation. It's a way to track what's being said about a certain issue. But a hashtag is not a movement. Movements are built by people who train other people to be courageous enough to fight back. Movements are built by people who encourage other people to be courageous by taking action and building the things that we want. Movements are built by people who invite other people to be a part of the change that they want to see. And movements are built by people who themselves are courageous enough to not know the answer, but to keep going anyway. 6 years later, there's a lot of misconceptions about who we are and what we stand for, and so I want to spend like 5 seconds on that. And I say 5 seconds because this is well documented. For now, Mark Zuckerberg's internet is free. And it feels important for me to say that a lot of the stories that people tell me about the thing that we built are the stories that were told about the Young Patriots and the Black Panthers. They're the stories that were told about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King before they became icons after their death. These are stories that are intentionally designed to have you confused and scared and not totally wanting to be all the way down. So I hear things from people that are like, I believe that Black Lives Matter. I just wish you guys would be a little more like Dr. King. And I'm like, which part of Dr. King would you like us to be more like? Because I know for a fact that when Martin Luther King was alive and doing work, people weren't trying to mess with him. Lots of people weren't trying to mess with him. Some black folks were not trying to mess with him. My grandma was one of them. She was like, you know what? You're making a lot of trouble. And I'm not for that. Sure, she wanted justice, but she was not going to be marching across no bridges. Lots of white folks didn't like Martin Luther King at all. In fact, it prompted him to write a letter from jail, just down the way, where he talked about his disappointment in the white moderate. We'll come back to that. I read that letter every Martin Luther King Day because people want us to be more like Martin Luther King. And so you gotta give the people what they want. State-sanctioned violence is what Black Lives Matter is fighting. It's not just police violence, and I think sometimes we mix up the two. We use it synonymously, and in fact, lots of the stories I hear about Black Lives Matter are that Black Lives Matter is working to save the lives of Black men who are being killed by the police. And I have to remind people, yes, I don't want Black men to be killed by the police, but I also don't want Black women to be living in poverty. And I also don't want Black people living in cages for mistakes that other people can make and live free. So when we talk about state-sanctioned violence, I mean, sometimes we use a lot of big words to say really basic things. So let me just say basic. That state-sanctioned violence is violence that is deemed admissible. Violence that you get away with because it serves a purpose. So, police violence is sanctioned by the state. That's why police are not punished when they kill people in our communities. Because they have been given power by the government that says basically you get a pass because you're doing it on our behalf. I'll give you an example. In my state, California, everybody thinks we're super progressive. We are very progressive, and it's complicated. The officer who killed Oscar Grant was the first police officer in the history of the state to ever go to jail for killing somebody in the line of duty in my progressive state. Violence that is deemed admissible by the state, violence that's given a pass, the death penalty. 42% of people on death row in America are Black. And Black people are 37% of executions, despite being 13% of the population in this country. This is violence that is given a pass because it serves a purpose. Mass incarceration is state violence. Black men are 37% of all men who are incarcerated. Black women are 22% and growing of all women who are incarcerated. There's 2.2 million people incarcerated in this country, and the United States incarcerates more people than anywhere else in the world. Poverty is state-sanctioned violence. 9 million Black people in America live below the poverty line in 2017. In my city where I live, 1 in 4 Black people live below the poverty line. So state-sanctioned violence is not just police violence. It is violence that doesn't carry consequences or penalties by the state that makes it state-sanctioned. So when we say that we want an end to state-sanctioned violence against Black people, we mean all forms of state violence. I was here a week or two ago visiting the National Peace and Justice Memorial in Montgomery, and I went to the Legacy Museum as well. And I started thinking a lot about state-sanctioned violence as racial terrorism, which is what Brian Stevenson calls lynching, racial terrorism, and the ways in which racial terrorism shapes the lives, not just of Black people, but of all of us. Racial terrorism is a form of state-sanctioned violence. It is a form of violence that's intended to strip people of their dignity, but it's also intended to strip people of the fight they have. You should know, and you do know this, lynching was used for a lot of reasons. Lots of the stories that we get told, right, are that lynching was used when people did bad things, Black people did bad things. Lynching was used in particular against Black people who were organizing, against workers who were organizing, against anybody who dared to take up space and fight for their right to live well. And while that's no longer a widespread practice, although I think people in the South would say it still happens more than people know about, there are practices that we use that are sanctioned by the state that maintain racial hierarchies, where Black people get dehumanized on a regular basis through an ongoing practice, right, of racism. Now I offer this because, again, BLM is not just about police violence. And that's important for people to understand because it does lend itself to better understanding not only why we work to build solidarity, but why it's necessary for our framework to not be narrow. We use the word intersectionality a lot. It's overused and understood. And so let me just say, and I can tell you this from the scholars who coined these terms. Kimberly Crenshaw should be named here. She coined the term intersectionality, but she didn't come up with the concept. Intersectionality was being talked about in the Combahee River Collective with people like Barbara Smith, right? They called it multiplicities. But all of that aside, it is a long way of talking about how we don't leave people behind. Mm-hmm. See, oftentimes when we talk about movements, and I said I wasn't gonna talk this long, so I'm gonna do what I can, but I told y'all we're gonna try to find the balance. When we talk about movements, movements can only be successful if we don't leave people behind. And the mistakes that movements make, that I really wish we could make different mistakes, because these are old ones, and we should know better, right? The mistakes that most movements make is that they don't invite as many people as possible in to being the key to their own freedom. And our movements, because they are so siloed and so narrow, because we as human beings are naturally self-interested, we forget that actually the only way that people can live together in a place is recognizing that we depend on each other to survive. Now, under capitalism, we prey on each other. I can talk about capitalism.
Yeah.
It is the economic system that we live under. But it's important just to be honest that capitalism, as an organized economic system, it's organized around competition, and it's organized around preying on other people. The way that we generate wealth in this country is off of the backs of other people. All of us do. Those of us that work in low-wage jobs, we are siphoning, right, off of other people. Those of us that have a little more money in our pocket, we have a little more money in our pocket because we have made sure that somebody else doesn't have money in their pocket. It's a hard pill to swallow. And that's not a values-based thing. That is an actual, this is how it functions. And so, under an economic system that is predatory in its nature, we are taught, right, that it's self for self, okay? So I only want to do my thing on police violence, but any other issue, I can't do that. And I only want to talk about Black men and police violence, and I can't really deal with other inputs. But the reality is, we can't stop police violence if we don't gather everybody who is impacted by police violence. I think there are interesting ways to think about everybody who is impacted. Because even if somebody themselves has not experienced police violence, we should be asking the question, right? Does the existence of police violence make your life better or worse? But we're not asking those questions right now. Right now, the way that police violence gets framed is that it's white against Black, police against people, and I'm guilty of that as well. But I can tell you, and here's another story people tell me about the thing that I started. People are like, you hate police. I'm like, I don't hate police. I don't desire policing. And those are different things. One thing we're talking about human beings, and the other thing we're talking about functions. I don't think that the way that we police in this country keeps people safe. And I don't think that the way that we police in this country is sustainable for a humane society. And I think that if we have honest conversations with people in law enforcement, they tell you similar things. Like if we're really having an honest conversation.
May I please say something? Do you know we're in a situation right now?
I do.
Community? Okay, because you haven't mentioned it yet.
Yeah.
And it sounds real abstract, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Hi. I'll stop now.
You don't have to stop. I just
got the look.
Let me just offer something.
I know, but it's been really just.
Let me just offer something.
I'm about to leave if you don't mention it. Okay.
You should do whatever you feel like you need to do.
Honestly, I will, but I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I should just go.
I have already said.
I missed it. I'm listening, and I missed it. All right. I'm listening to her right
now. Okay. Here's why I'm talking about this. I'm talking about this because I think if we're trying to figure out how to change the things that we don't like, how to change the fact that there was a man murdered in front of his child, and that there's a new narrative about why it happened, why it was deserved, why it was justified, why you will not see the pictures, why you will not see the video. If we really want to make progress on that, I think we have to figure out how we get bigger than the people in this room. I think we have to figure out how to find the people and how to get to the people who are not thinking about this every day, who aren't sitting in conversations like this, wondering when I'm going to talk about a man that was killed here. For a lot of us, we live our lives not thinking about that. You need those people too. An organizing school can help you think about how to bring those people in so that it is something that they care about. But I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that getting people in our movement who don't think about this every day, who don't go to sleep at night sick because Black people are being murdered, who don't go to sleep at night sick because there are people living on the streets. There's a lot of those people. And they are ripe for organizing. But something happens with us where we kind of just talk to each other about the things that we know about already, and that we already agree about, right? So just to give context about why I'm talking about law enforcement and policing and cutting our issues a little bit bigger. Where I was headed was to say that there are people who are engaged in a profession that told them they were going to do a certain set of tasks that they're not doing. And two things happen. One, you get sucked in to the other part of what your job entails. Or two, right? Or two, you get really burnt out by having to over and over again not do the job that you signed up to do. Now, with that being said, how do we dismantle a system that is not serving us without bringing in the millions of people who have loved ones and family members who do this work and are also not happy with the outcomes? I say all these things to be provocative because I think that the way that I've been taught to organize by the worst of my teachers has been actually that our team is very small, and we cut our team smaller and smaller every chance we get. Sometimes if we don't share the same approach, the same tactics, the same strategies, then we say, oh, we can't work together. Oh, those people, they work on voting. I don't believe in voting, so I can't work with them. Oh, those people, they do disruption. I'm not comfortable with that, so I can't work with them. But the thing is, we kind of need each other.
Yep.
You can't have fundamental change without all of the tools in the toolbox that are needed to make that change. Let me also just offer that one of the things that I have learned from being so fortunate enough to live in one of the places, because I do know history and I know that the Panther Party actually started here. I do know that. And Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, right, helped to launch another organization in the place that I now call home. You know, it's so funny, because in my state, where people feel that we must be drinking radicalism from the fountains, we're not. In my state and in my city, we don't hero worship the Panthers. We're not allowed to, because they are beautifully human. And the reason that I offer this is because even in these moments, when we start to ask ourselves what can be done, we kind of lay ourselves at the feet of people like me. But I'm like you. I don't have special credentials. I've been an organizer for a long time. And what I love is to connect with people and help each of us see the best of what we have to offer. And I try to use myself as an example and as a model that helps other people feel brave. But I don't want to be a hero that you worship or that you ask for the answer for what I can do here in Huntsville, Alabama. I don't live here in Huntsville, Alabama. I don't organize here. I don't know the contours, I don't know the contradictions, but what I do know is that movements are hard. What I do know is that organizing is an art and a science. What I do know is that we have to invest in each other's ability to be powerful. But part of how we do that is by seeing ourselves as powerful, by seeing ourselves as the Angela Davises and the Huey Newtons and the Erica Hugginses. All of those people are humans that have flaws, that don't know the answers, that have trained themselves in a craft, and that also try to figure it out every single day. So if you did come here to hear from me how you're going to change what happens with your district attorney, how you're going to stop police killings in your community, I can't tell you that. I can tell you the tools that you need. I can tell you how to connect with other people to build the kind of pressure on a system that is actually very fragile when you see it. But in order for that to get realized, you all have to decide that the way that you are going to move forward is not just going to be different this time, but that you're going to build something that lasts. You know, it's interesting. When we started Black Lives Matter in 2013, it was all the rage. It was all the rage. We are now in 2019, going into 2020. In 2016, people said, we need Black Lives Matter to change the outcome of the election. Black Lives Matter cannot do that, but you can. The last thing I will offer, and then we should open it up to have a lot of discussion. I talked earlier about fascism that is encroaching upon this country, and I think we both agree it's here. Interestingly, you will also tell me that people have been talking about fascism for a very long time. And now it's very interesting because things that we said were fascist were fascist-like, but they weren't fascist. This is a fascist period. There's a lot of characteristics to what fascism means. Again, Mark Zuckerberg's internet is free for now, but what I will say is we don't have a choice but to figure it out and do it differently than we've ever done it before. If you're here because you wanted to just understand a little bit more about BLM, I hope you did. But if you're here because you want to figure out how to be a part of long-lasting change, I really do hope you support this school. We are facing one of the biggest milestones of my generation. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, people will ask, what were you doing? The same way that people ask what you were doing when people were being beaten on the bridge, people will ask you 20 years from now, who were you and what did you do in this terrible moment in history? We actually get to decide who we are going to be. For those of us who didn't come up in the civil rights movement, a lot of us like to think that we would have been Martin Luther King or Malcolm, right? For those of us that came up in the crushing of the last period of a vibrant Black liberation movement, lots of us would like to think we would have been Assata. But the reality is, if we're being really honest, right? We get to choose. We get to choose. We can either be Malcolm or High, or we could be the person that says, I didn't know who to be, and I didn't know how to be, so I just didn't. I remember asking my mom and my grandma, after hearing all these stories about people being beaten in the streets and hosed down and attacked with dogs, where were you? And it was fascinating to hear the stories of people like my grandmother, so I was nowhere near that. Imagine. Now, each of us get to make that choice about who we're gonna be. But we should also understand that building solidarity, building coalitions, building power is not just something you're born to do. It takes work, it takes training. And not the kind of training you get a degree from, although I do hope you give certificates at the school. But the kind of training that reminds you that there is not a blueprint. If there was, I would give it to you, I promise. You would, right? I know your heart. You wouldn't waste people's time. You'd be like, okay, I got these cliff notes. There aren't cliff notes. The cliff notes get made by us, and then we share them, and then we make different mistakes, hopefully. But what happens when we hero worship? What happens when we choose to sit on the sidelines? What happens when we get tired and we say, I need to just go back to my life now?